Hey, so for anybody who is here yet, welcome to the stream. We are not going to get started officially until 6:30, but if you are here, definitely feel free to say hello in the chat. Um, if there's a problem that you want us to go over or you want to talk about something specific, chat's going to be the best place for that. Not the YouTube chat, of course, that's going to be the Slack chat. If you're on YouTube and you somehow found this live stream, uh, well done. But also in the description of the live chat, there is a link that will take you, one, to the Slack channel, which is associated with our free prep course. And you can ask questions there in the general chat, or you could DM me, David Coleman, one word. Or you can, there's also a link to sign up for the premium prep courses that are coming up. And you figure that this software engineering basic prep course is self-guided, you walk through it yourself. Some people find that to be a good idea until they get into it, and then they find that they have difficulty keeping themselves accountable, and that's what premium prep is for. Premium prep will put you into an actual classroom-like zone. At that point, you'll be able to talk with other people who are in that course. There's official start times and homework and all the good stuff that comes with courses. So yeah, we're gonna hang out here. Tell me about sound levels. Tell me if you can see things properly. And you start off with some examples you might see on the assessment. We absolutely can. When you say the assessment, you mean the technical admissions assessment, I assume. And the technical admissions assessment is our fancy way of saying a technical interview. The only reason they don't call it an interview is because you're not actually going to be one-on-one with an interviewer. It's a partially self-recorded, partially a group thing. You will not be solving any problems in front of the other people in the group, but the idea is this. If you have to be with a single interviewer, it can be really difficult for everybody to get an interview time where they feel, ready to go. We have too many people who ended up interviewing at 8 in the morning if they're a night person, or late at night when they're a morning person. And so the group format is only to give more people the opportunity for that, perfect time of day. You got everything organized and you're able to hit the interview perfectly. So by technical admissions assessment, we do probably just mean that which you must pass to get into a Hack Reactor, which, oh yeah, that's definitely what we're here doing. One of the things I usually point people to are a couple things. One is this diagnostic skills check. This is a set of questions that are, essentially, it's going to test your ability to move between arrays and objects. So we can start working on these. If this is a little bit too beginner for you, I don't know that there's a ton of people here yet, so it's definitely a moment for, hey, do the harder version. But since it's live, and since solving coding questions in front of people live usually is better if you warm up with one, let's start with convert array to an object. So if you are a beginner, you are going to benefit from every possible version of do the same thing every time. So you're going to see me do that as well. The first thing you're going to do is read the problem out loud. Convert array to object 1. Write a function transform first and last that takes in an array and returns an object with 1, the first element of the array as the object's key, and 2, the last element of the array as that key's value. So this requires you to know a couple different things. You need to know about functions, you need to know about parameters, you need to know about objects, and you need to understand how to add properties to an object. If you understand all of that, this problem is very easy. It's straightforward. If you don't understand that, then you should probably try to understand that. You want to figure that that's what module 0 is for. Module 0 is going to be basically everything that you would need to know, more or less. But it's an introduction. So it's kind of like getting you used to the idea that you are not going to understand everything perfectly, but you can go back and look at it. That's why you'll notice at the end of Module 0, there's this section in the functions unit that's called all of the problems and all of the docs. Now, I'm going to open up all of the docs because this is what it's meant to be used for. It's supposed to be, after you got through all of Module 0, now you've essentially gone through all this information at least once. So now when you get onto a problem and you need to look something up real quick, this is going to be your Stack Overflow, Mozilla Developer Network, which are places that professional developers go to get professional level assistance or read documentation. But the problem with that is that, well, it's for professionals, so there'll be a lot of things on there that can scare away newcomers, and that's why this is here, is to give you kind of like a junior version of documentation and get used to that idea. I heard that even past the TA, do you need to still take one? Okay, there's a question about something called a readiness assessment. everything that you want to think about when it comes to getting into Hack Reactor is making sure that you don't give us money for an education we can't give you. So the technical interview, or the TAA, the technical admissions assessment, is the first step of that. But to be honest, it only tests your ability to manipulate JavaScript. So as you'll notice, we don't do anything in software engineering here. This is just a JavaScript array, returns a JavaScript object. But software engineering involves a bunch of stuff. Software engineering involves HTML, CSS, workflows, GitHub, some more advanced computer science, not advanced, some slightly more advanced computer science stuff. So what they're going to do is, before you actually get started with the course, there may be a situation where if you have had difficulty completing your pre-course work, you'll be asked to take something called a readiness assessment. You want to figure that the only reason that's there is because it moves really fast once the course starts, and anything that we can do to try to make sure that everybody that is there on day one is going to succeed in the program, that's usually what that's directed towards. So readiness assessments do exist. They're not scary. It's one of those things. It is a method of making sure that you don't pay for something that you can't get any value out of. So hope that answers the question. I'm also probably going to answer the questions, what would you call it, in rather broad intervals. So if your question has been asked and didn't get answered by the end of it, please feel free to send me a direct message. But going back and forth between questions and coding can be a little bit jarring for people watching. So for now, we're going to solve this question, and then we'll return to any questions. Okay, so I see that there's another question, but I just said that we were going to wait for a little while to answer that. So hang on, whoever asked that question, I will be done with this problem in just a moment, and then we'll talk about it. So here's a problem that we'll just kind of warm up with. It's got an input that's an array. It's got an output that's a function. So the first thing we want to think is, if my array is not part of the return value, I need to create my return value. So I'm going to say create a result object. If my result object is the result of this function, probably going to need to return it at the end. So we'll go ahead and do that. The next thing we're going to do, and we could probably just go ahead and code that out. You'll also see me use var and let interchangeably. It's mostly because when I wrote this course, I decided I wanted to use var. I'm going to have to go back at some point and change them all to let. There's a difference that's not really important for us. At a certain point, it will become important, but it's easier to demonstrate to yourself the difference than it is to just listen to somebody say, hey, here's the difference. Just a new version of JavaScript. So we'll say let result equal an object, and we'll return the object at the end. And since there's only one thing, we need to essentially add a property to our result object. Now, an object like this has properties. In this case, it has one property. Each property has a key and a value, and almost everything to do with objects is an interplay between those two. Objects have properties, properties have keys and values. So in order for us to access the first and last elements in the array, that's also something we're going to need to figure out, right? Because adding a property to an object is going to rely on our ability to know the name of the key and the value, and the key and the value are going to be the first and last value in the array. So we'll say variable first, and we're going to set that equal to the first value in the array. Arrays can be accessed using square brackets and a number for the index at which we want to access the array. So the first one's easy. Arrays start counting at 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The last value is a little trickier. The last value might be something different based on the length of the array. But we have our answer right there. If it's based on the length of the array, then what we can do is we can use that to our advantage, because the length of the array is going to be something that we can grab without knowing anything about the array. We only just have to know the name. We can go over the last two problems in Module 0, all questions. Yes, we can. We'll do that next. Oh, another question. Which technology you guys will teach in the program? Okay, so it's JavaScript is the programming language. We're going to teach you software engineering. Software engineering usually involves your understanding of things like Git and GitHub, which are local and remote, repositories for files. I think like jQuery comes up at one point, but you basically learn that just to figure out how much you don't want to use it. Honestly, it varies, but you're basically going to go over the entire stack, and what versions of things you go over for the stack are going to be highly dependent on whatever our instructors decide is most useful for you after you leave the program. If you have a Mac, that's going to be the best version of things. You can also get through the program on Linux or Windows, but it will require you to be a little bit more skilled than those people who might be using Macs, mainly because, same thing with JavaScript. If everybody's on the same thing, it's easier for people to teach in a classroom setting. So if you do not have a Mac, you can definitely get by with a Linux operating system installed on a PC, or even a PC. I've heard people getting through it with that as well, but you might have a little bit more difficulty than those who have a Mac OS operating system. So hope that sorted out the question. If it didn't, please feel free to ask it again. Let's finish up this question because we had about 2 minutes until it starts, and somebody asked for the last 2 problems in all questions, and I don't remember what I put there, so it's going to be fun. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of the fact that if this array is of length 6, which it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then the last value is going to be at index 5. If the array was of length 5, the last value will be at index 4. If the length of the array is 4, last value will be at 3. So if the index is array.length minus 1, that's going to give us what we want. A lot of people will do this at this point. They'll say, actually, I don't know that we have time to do what most people do. We'll just do the answer. Object at first will allow us to take advantage of the value of this variable, which we've assigned as the first value in the array. And we're going to assign that key, creating a property in the object, to whatever the value at last is. Then we return the object. Oh no! Should assign transform object is not defined. Ah, it sure isn't. So in case you are following along, well, you are following along. We called it result, and then we called it object. So we're going to need to make a choice. Let's go ahead and call it result. And we'll run our test again, and we're in good shape. Also, you'll notice that there are video walkthroughs. The video walkthroughs are basically just answers, and it's essentially what I just did, except, well, in some cases it's better, in some cases it's worse. So there was a question about all the problems, so let's go to all the problems. Oh, go on, wake up. And I think the question was the last 2 problems. And that sweeps our floor. Oh, yeah. For anybody who's curious about that, when I was doing the videos, I noticed that I said we're in good shape at the end of virtually every single video for one of the modules. And so for the next one, I decided to try to come up with different versions of that. It's mildly amusing, but I think it's one of those when you get stuck by yourself for too long, things become more amusing to you than they actually are. All right. Ah, yes. Oh, good. I love these kind of problems. You have that momentary gap of like, oh no, I hope it's not one of those hard ones that I have to practice before doing it live. But this is not that. This is essentially the same problem in 2 different fashions. One is we have a string, we need to count all the characters. One is we have a sentence, and we need to count all the words. So both of these are going to take advantage of something called split. Split is a very, very nice little method, and split is going to allow us to separate. Oh wait, I forget what it does. So what I'll do is I'll go over here to my all the docs. I'm going to hit Command F to find something. And then what I'm going to try to find is split. Transforming a string into an array. So if I come back here to all the problems, it looks like in both of these cases, I have a string, and it'd probably be better if I had an array. Now, in this one, we don't actually need to do that, but we'll get to that in a moment. For this one, though, we have a string that is words separated by spaces. It'd be much better for our purposes if we had an array of these words. So what that means is that we're going to need to split it. When you have a situation like this where you might be doing like a method you're not really sure of, you could, of course, excuse me, jump right into the code. But you could also come over here to a program called Replit. I love Replit. Replit helped us out when we were just starting this prep program. They let us host a ridiculous number of students for free for a little while they were getting things organized, which is cool. But it also lets you do things other than JavaScript. You can load up different files. This is actually a really robust platform, and it's very useful. So definitely feel free to sign up for an account so you can save yours. Yeah, although you don't even need to sign up for an account to use it, which I also like. So it's based in our string. We'll say variable str is equal to this. And what we want to do is we want to create an array that will be this string of words, but we want it as an array of words. Now there's a reason that I wrote that so terribly, and it's because you are going to benefit from trying to write things terribly over and over again, because what will happen is you'll eventually come up with ways to write it shorter. If anybody has been around for some of my videos, or if they were in mentored prep, you know that I focus so heavily on pseudocode it's almost absurd. And the reason is because you don't think in code. You might think you do. You might have dreams in code, and that's cool, but you don't. What happens is that code is like a creation that you make, and you tend to love it. And so what you want is you want any code that you write to work. So rather than thinking about what the code is actually doing or what the problem is asking, you tend to think, how can I make what the code that I wrote work. And we don't want that. So the reason that we're going to write things in comments first is to avoid that attachment to something that might not be helpful for us. There's probably a life lesson in there, but we'll forget that for now. So we'll create an array. We'll set it equal to str.split. Let's go back to our docs and have a look at this. So we could say variable split on nothing, and that does something. So let's just go over here and comment this out, paste this in, and run it. And what this is going to do is it's going to split without passing anything in there. And for some reason, it gives us an array with just whatever the string was as the only value. So swing and a miss, but that's okay. The next one we might think is, how about if we split on an empty string? So we got ABC, we're going to call split, and we're going to pass into split, which is a method, an empty string. Then we're going to log to the console the value of that call, plus a little message that'll help us remember what we outputted. So as you can see, split with no arguments applied, and then what that was. So this is the next version. Let's go ahead and run it. Perfect. So it looks like we can use split in a couple of different ways so far, but we still haven't really hit on anything that helps us yet. We want the input string to be split on a space. So this is splitting on a hyphen. As better practice together variables with let and const over var. Yes, probably. I am archaic because I wrote the course without using let. And the idea is this. Let and const give you basically what var does with more specificity in areas that don't matter to somebody just starting out for JavaScript, or at least that's what I was thinking. I've since come to the understanding it's probably not a great idea, but you want to keep in mind that let versus var, it's not a big deal right now. And by right now, I mean as a beginner heading towards the interview, it's not that big of a deal. As you move further into it and you understand concepts like scope, then it is going to become a big deal, and it'll be useful to probably use let. So it is entirely possible that within 15 minutes I'll start using let. So let's go ahead and hit run. We're going to get the same result, and the reason is because split is going to identify whatever we tell it to split on, and it's essentially going to split that into an array on that separator. So if that's the case, taking what we just learned, let's try to figure out line 5. We'll say variable array equals string.split. And I want to call split on a space because rather than splitting on a hyphen, which we did here, which gave us those individual without the hyphens in an array, we want the words here in an array. So we'll hit run. We don't see anything. Now the reason we didn't see anything is because we're not console.logging anything. The first step in debugging is to figure out why am I not seeing what I should see, and then what did I do to think that I should see that? And it's like, I thought I would see the result here. I don't, and the reason I don't is because I didn't console.log anything. So now that we have console.logged, we are now closer to where we want to be. We want to be at a place where we can, where do we want to be? Ah, yes, we want to count the words. So that was a little sidetrack, and so now we have the concept well in hand that because our string is our input is a string, we can turn that into an array, which we could then iterate over. So let's talk about the pseudocode of what this is going to look like. Is everybody able to see what I'm typing on this page? If you are, don't worry about it. If you are not, let me know and we could probably make it a little bit bigger. It does get a little hard to read the bigger it gets, but there's probably, yep, everybody look at the message in general. That is a very, very eloquent way to put what I inelegantly put for a couple of minutes. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is convert input to an array of words, iterate over the array of words. We're missing something though, right? We need a result object. Because we think about it, the return result of this function is going to be an object that is going to have this count for each word that we see. So there's a couple things that we need to take into account when we're doing this, but we'll take care of them as we go. Create a result object. If we create a result object, let's go to the end and return our result object. Convert the input to an array of words, iterate over the array of words. I'm going to indent line 5, and the reason I'm going to do that is because the sooner you can get used to what your pseudocode means, which is to say that if it's indented, it means that this is happening inside of the iteration, or if it's, well, actually, that's pretty much it. That's not true. We can also make use of words like current and next. If I'm inside of an iteration and I say current, that usually means whatever level of iteration I've made it to, that's what I'm talking about. So iterate over the array of words, and we'll say if current word has not been counted, add the current word to result object with value of 1. And as you can see, it looks like the words end up being the keys in the object. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a property to the object. The key is going to be the current word, and the value is going to be 1. Now the reason we're going to say 1 is because this is the portion of our program that has we haven't found this word yet. So if we find it, we'll add it and make it 1. Otherwise, and we'll actually write otherwise, we couple things. We are going to assume that the first portion of the if statement happened, because that's the only way that our object could have a count for a given word is if we actually added it the first time. So assuming that it is already there, we increment the value of the current word by 1. And that's actually it. So let's use let, because let there be let. Let result equal an empty object, return result, convert the input to an array of words. So we'll say let words equal string of words dot split, splitting on a space, not a colon. And we're also going to use a lot of for loops in here. I'm a huge fan of higher order functions, but higher order functions are not really something you want to mess with until you're very sure of how to do what higher order functions do using for loops and while loops or whatever. So yeah, excuse me. So we'll say let I equal 0 or less than words.length, just a regular for loop. And we're going to wrap our pseudocode. And I'm going to do something called creating an alias. And all I'm going to do, the reason I'm going to do that is because it's going to be easier to follow my pseudocode if I put a temporary name on whatever words at I is. So I'm going to say current word is equal to words at I. Now, a lot of people might think, hey, that's longer. Why is that going to help? And the reason it's going to help is because my entire pseudocode describes something called current word. So if I have a value called current word or a variable called current word, the TAA will not ask you to solve things using higher order functions. They may give you a couple of examples using higher order functions and like see how you do. But you want to figure that something happens during the TAA where you essentially pass, but there's time left. So those problems are usually to make sure that you don't freak out if you're confronted with something that's a little bit more difficult than what you'd faced before. In general, most of the skills that you've developed working on the program or the course up to that point usually serve you pretty well in the interview itself. So and we want current words has not been counted. So this is going to take advantage of something that's just a property of objects. Every object in JavaScript automatically has a value for every possible key, but it's undefined. And it's essentially like a circular definitions. What we'll say is that if a key is not present within an object, the value at that key is undefined. And, well, yeah, that's just it. So we'll say if result at current word, and this is how we would access the property that's located at current word. We're going to check to see if that's equal to undefined. If it is, then we know we need to count this word, and that we haven't counted it yet. We're going to do that by saying result at current word, and then we're going to set that equal to 1. So line 12 creates a property on the result object with a key of current word and sets its value equal to 1. So we have now officially counted it the first time. Excellent work. Congratulations. Now we only have to worry about what happens if we see it again. If we see it again, we access the property the exact same way, but instead of saying equals 1, we say plus equals 1, which is essentially the same as result, was essentially saying the same as set yourself to whatever you were plus 1. There's a couple different ways to say this, but this one's relatively easy. All right, so we look over, it looks like our pseudocode lines up with our code, and let's see if we did anything wrong. Ah, excellent. Expected an empty, oh, you rascally rascal. So one of the things that we neglected to do on this problem is search for something called edge cases. Edge cases are situations where we don't really have to worry about the logic of the problem. It's essentially like, hey, if the input comes in and it's no good, then don't do anything, log that the input is no good. We're not in the context of anything. We're mainly just manipulating the data structures involved in JavaScript as such. So we don't have a bunch of like error logging or anything like that yet. But for now, it does tell us if given an empty string, your function should return an empty object. So the very first thing we want to do in our function, before we create a result object, before we do anything else, is going to be if string of words is equal to an empty string, return an empty object. So that's it. And essentially we're going to skip everything else, and if this happens, we'll just return this object literal, and that'll satisfy the constraints of the problem. Hooray. Okay, cool. So the next problem is exactly the same thing, except instead of a string of words, which were separated by spaces, we actually have a string of characters, and we want to deal with every character. It turns out that you could use a for loop to iterate over a string the exact same way that you can use a for loop to iterate over an array. They have very similar properties. One major difference is that arrays are mutable and strings are not. Strings are immutable. Does anybody care about why that is the case? If you don't, we can probably just keep going. But immutability versus mutability it's a little bit starting to edge towards that whole const idea. Const is a way to make sure that your arrays, if you need them to be, are, well, actually, let's stop there because my knowledge of const is, well, inconstant at best. So immutability just means that you can't reassign a string like individually, which is to say, let's come over here, we'll look at a string, str is equal to I'm staying put, and we could say str at 1 is going to be m. And of course we need a console.log it. When we do that, we'll see that the value is m. But let's say it's like, okay, I want to change the value at 1. I want to say str is equal to, at 1 is equal to q, because I wanted to say iq staying put. I don't know why, but that's what I want to do. Now you'd think maybe that this would work, but it doesn't. And the reason is that strings are immutable. However, if we have an array, and the array has a couple of values, and I say, well, we'll say arrow for some reason. Arrow at 1 is equal to, we'll say string 2. Let's comment this out for now, and we'll have a look at whatever arrow at 1 is. So arrow at index 1 is going to be our value 2. We should not change this to that. We should change it to the number 5. So what line 2 is going to show us is that arrays are mutable, which means that even though we've already created the array, we can change it. And we can change it just by saying, hey, whatever your value at 1 is, change it to something else. Now, I've never actually worked with const, just because I'm incredibly lazy. But I wonder if this is how that works. Oh no, const doesn't. Maybe if it's like arrow is equal to like a string, this should not happen, but might if you are not careful. So let's say we wanted to reassign our const. Oh, come back. Reassign our const, and yeah, okay, good. So it's like tried to assign something to a constant variable, and that's what const does. Const basically lets you make something permanent, whereas JavaScript, if you use var, doesn't. We're not going to get into let just because let has to do with scope. Somebody, very helpful person, posted, I'm not sure exactly what this is, but it looks like somebody wrote a post about how to, somebody made a post about, let and const and the difference. Definitely feel free to check that out. It's in the general channel of the Slack. And also, if you come across tutorials, free things that you like, always feel free to post that in the general channel. We want to try to keep this as free as possible. So yeah. Where were we? Count all the characters. And what were we just figuring out? Now we were on a tangent. So let's go through this one as quickly as possible. We'll say let result equal an object. We're going to return the result. Let's say for let I equal 0. I is less than the string.length. I plus plus. Go on then. Also, this defaults to a tab of 4 spaces, and as you can imagine, I'm not a fan of that, so every time you see me delete back to 2 spaces, that's what I'm doing. There is no actual utility to that, especially in this context, but it's a habit. So we need to say if result at, and this one we're not going to use an alias, and we'll see why it's a little bit more awkward. If result at string at I is equal to undefined. Oh boy. Computer's doing that thing where it's like, I might die on you. But that's okay. So we'll say result at string at I is equal to 1. Or we know we've already counted it, in which case we're going to say that the string at I as the value of our key within the object now needs to be equal to whatever it was plus 1. And we're not going to forget our edge case this time. If given an empty string, your function should return an empty object. So one thing that you'll see in a lot of tutorials or solutions online is people will say things like if string.length. Oh, I guess we could do that. We could do string length and check to see if it's equal to 0. That would be the same idea. But we could just also directly compare it because it's a scalar with an empty string. And they'll put the return on the same line as the if statement, like that. Now, I don't like it, but like a lot of things I don't like, it's because I didn't learn JavaScript when this was a widely distributed part of it. So I don't have a real reason for it. For beginners, though, I do caution you against trying to get too fancy with things too quickly. The biggest watershed moment for everybody is the technical admissions assessment. Once you pass that, go wild. Do whatever you want for the most part. You'll come across a ton of different things, most of which you'll need to throw away. But for now, you don't want to be thinking which way should I do this when you get to the technical interview or the technical admissions assessment. You just want to think, go. Let me solve, and then later we can worry about if it was the most elegant solution. So enough jibber jabber before finding out if we got it correct. We did, and we are, well, yeah, in good shape. Anyway, that's it for those two problems. For the person who asked for those problems, was that a satisfactory explanation, and do you have any follow-up questions? Hey, great idea. We should solve this using reduce. So a higher order function, and please, if anybody has any questions that have anything to do with not reduce or another question that they want to ask about, please mention something on the Slack channels. And the general chat is usually the best way to do that. But for now, let's mess with reduce for a little while. Actually, we're not going to mess with it. I'm just going to show you how to do reduce on this problem. So what we're going to say return string dot split on nothing dot reduce. We're going to pass to reduce a function that's going to take our result and a current letter, and then we're going to pass in as our initial value an empty object. Then we're going to say return result because we always have to in the context of reduce. Then what we're going to say is if result at letter is equal to undefined, then we'll say result at letter is equal to 1, else result at letter plus equals 1. And let's comment out the rest of this. We're going to leave our edge case just because there's not really a way to get around that right now. String.split on nothing, result, return result. Okay, I think that's it. Hooray! How often do you do these types of office hours? Well, honestly, I don't really do this. I got transferred from something called mentored prep to a different section, and I like doing mentored prep a lot. But I found that most of the time the students I was working with didn't really need much besides just like videos and stuff. And so that's why I added the videos to the course. But also, this is more just kind of, well, I don't know. If this works, they'll probably get somebody who's better at this than me to do it, or it might just be me. But the frequency is probably going to be once a week for now, but more if it's requested, just because, well, I like the idea of there being a lot of free resources to be able to get into Hack Reactor. They've got that income share agreement, which seems to be pretty reasonable from what I hear. And then also if we have the free prep course, the idea is we don't want there to be any more hindrance than there already is for somebody to try to become a developer, because that's kind of what Hack Reactor stands for. It's the whole idea of like, anybody can code, which is, if you've ever seen the movie Ratatouille, similar to that. Not everybody has the skills or the temperament or the inclination to be a developer, but a developer can be any type of person. And just because that person doesn't have money doesn't really mean that the world should be deprived of their skills and that they should be deprived of demonstrating their skills just because they don't have like the seed money. So that's why there's videos embedded in every portion of the course, except for all the problems. I guess I never did that for all the problems. Well, I mean, they're kind of in the rest of the course, so it really didn't seem necessary. But I might do that at some point, maybe like a speed run, because 120 problems might be kind of fun to see how fast you can do it. Anyway, so that's how you might do a problem solving, or solve that problem using reduce. If you, wait, where did it go? Oh, there it is. Cool. So let's go ahead and check some threads. For acing the TAA, let's talk about that. For acing the TAA, the best thing that you can do is practice our prep course like it's a gym, not like it's a track. Well, I guess tracks can sometimes be at gyms, and a good track is a circular one. But let's picture it is not an A to Z journey. It's like a, hey, hang out here until you can do this stuff without thinking about it. The very, very useful, what's it called? There's like a useful idiom for this. It's like amateurs practice until they get it right. Professionals practice until they can't get it wrong. So that idea combined with writing pseudocode, pseudocode will save almost any problem that you have. And in fact, the only time where I've ever really butchered something in an important situation was one of these previous streams. I tried to solve a problem that a user submitted. I made a mistake at the very beginning, basically not following any of my own advice. And then rather than following my own advice, which would be write pseudocode before you try to actually code the problem, I tried to code it and became a disaster. Actually, in case you're curious what that problem was, I put it into the course. Because that's the other thing, is that I don't see any reason why the course shouldn't balloon to a ridiculous size because, why not? So the ballooning is mostly going to be happening here in this advanced pre-assessment practice. This advanced problem set guide is, there's two in here. One is essentially problems from the rest of the course, just kind of like, amalgamated here. Especially at the bottom, some of these problems from Module 2, where they at? Yeah, the current inventory ones, you'll notice that in the course itself, they don't have tests. These ones have tests. So it can be like a nice way to practice what the problems look like. Which segments of the prep course? Oh, that's the fun part. It's basically all of the stuff in the basic prep course. That's what's useful for the TAA. But you do want to figure that the prep course is designed very, very specifically. So let's talk about that, because that's important. I'm going to look at the overall view. This is like the welcome to. Get on Slack, find out what the course is. Nothing fancy. Module 0 is, what is JavaScript? Do a bunch of problems to the point where you understand what JavaScript is and how to use it in a basic sense. Module 1 is like, okay, you're going to start to hurt your wrist because you're going to do 154 problems that are essentially going to be over and over repetitious versions of the same ideas. You have an object, it's got an array in it. I want you to give me all the values. Okay, now I want you to give me all of the even values. Now I want you to give me all the values that have a length that's even. And we're just going to slowly layer in the idea that you're going to be proficient with all of the basic elements of JavaScript before you move on to Module 2. Module 2 is where we start to flirt with software engineering. It's like, okay, you can code, but that doesn't mean you can be an engineer. Now, it usually does, but being an engineer has to do with the idea of understanding that the computer is not who we code for. It is us and the other people who are programmers. So testing, writing skeletons, organizing your approach is something that it becomes very, very important, and that's where pseudocode hopefully becomes a little bit more important. The fashion inventory problems are a very good litmus test as well, which is to say that if you can do all the fashion inventory problems, you're likely in good shape for the interview, the assessment or whatever. Module 3, this is a weird one. I like the problems in here, but I also don't. The reason I don't is because, well, in particular, let's click on them. Divide and conquer, this is more difficult than the interview, and not by a little bit. It's significantly more difficult. But the fun part is that it's, challenge yourself. You always want to consider that in programming, there is always a more difficult problem than the one that you're able to solve. And if you're constantly striving for that new ability, you'll always, well, for the most part, you'll find yourself in an advantageous situation. The most important part about Module 3 is this prepare the recording and time yourself and then deobfuscate the problem. Row 13 is how you're going to paste this problem in there, and it'll tell you what it is. And the reason is that you want to get the timer going, start the problem, and then see what it looks like. You also record yourself and then watch it. Now, that part can be applied to almost anything. So if you go to Code Wars, if you go to the Module 2 problems, this idea of starting a timer, recording yourself, and then watching it, you want to think of it like this. What is JavaScript? Practice that, organize it, perform it. That's the module's cadence. So, and then I added in another module after a little while, which was these module about the TIA or TAA. Shows you how to sign up and like what to expect in terms of timing for that. And then the advanced problem that I butchered on stream maybe like a couple weeks ago was I should reset the input on these. Go on then. Yes, this one. This is the one that I tried to do on stream. I did not do it correctly. If you want to have a go at this, definitely feel free to. But tried to put difficulty ratings on all this stuff, just especially for the more advanced practice, because you don't want to do this problem, find that you can't do it really well, and then decide that you're no good for the interview. The interview is much more likely to be kind of a corollary of, where did we go? Those ones we said, where'd they go? The diagnostic skills check, the fashion inventory, and then the advanced pre-assessment guides. The one that say they're about as difficult as the interview, that's usually what you want to stick around with. This is super helpful. Oh, that's awesome. Seriously, if even 4 people get assistance from this, I'm probably going to keep doing it until they tell me to stop, just because, well, I have a lot of fun doing this. I sincerely enjoy the idea of taking people who would be good at coding and introducing them to the idea that they're probably already good at it. Because, well, one of the things I was going to do a video on the other day was, so algorithms can seem like a scary word, right? Well, hopefully not, but an algorithm could be something as simple as, like, you're going to make a sandwich from the refrigerator. You want lettuce, you want tomato, and you want bread. And lettuce, tomato, bread, and let's say turkey. So what you could do is you could go to the cabinet, get the bread out, take 2 slices of bread out, put them on the table, and then wrap up the bread and put it back into the cabinet. And then walk back, look at your bread, decide you need turkey, go back to the refrigerator, grab the turkey, come back, put the turkey on, put the turkey away, find out you need tomato. Or you could organize your approach from the beginning, which is, okay, well, the cabinet is right here, the refrigerator is right here. If I grab the bread and then the turkey and then the lettuce and the cheese, or what were we doing? Lettuce? Whatever. You grab the ingredients. There are a lot of things like that that you're already doing. You're organizing your life in a way that you understand the constraints of what you need to get accomplished and what the world looks like that's kind of constraining you, and then you optimize, right? It's like, ooh, I can save 5 minutes if I heat up my coffee before I get into the shower. I always hesitate to mention those kind of details because everybody's life is different. You don't want to get people upset because you mentioned details that might be contrary to the way that they would conduct themselves. But most people do a certain amount of programming. They just operate with themselves as like the control system. Okay, so that was a half hour of just kind of like randomness. Does anybody are you going to leave the QA live streams up for future reference? Probably not. And the reason is that the live streams are mostly going to be a way to figure out what you all, that is to say the free users of prep, need more of or less of or more explanation. So the idea would be, if you're having trouble on a certain section and enough people are asking about it, then we'll add another section to the course that helps people with that. The end goal is a student should be able to enter this course, go through the entire thing, flawlessly pass the TAA because they were able to get to the material and explain parts that needed explanation. And then also, well, if you check on this YouTube channel, I'm also starting a read-through of Eloquent JavaScript. And that's going to be the first in a line of series of projects where we just sort of, like, there's a ton of free resources out there. And so why not have somebody who is a little bit more advanced at this stuff just walk you through it? There's a walkthrough of Udacity that actually used to be our Module 0. We just say, hey, go to this Introduction to Udacity program. I don't like it. There's actually one problem that I'm convinced is not correct, and I actually said that in the video, so if you want to check it out, definitely feel free to. Should newbies have any hesitation entering the web dev market since there's an increase of do-it-yourself systems like Wix and WordPress? I don't know, seems like front end might be going obsolete. Possibly. But also, here's what you want to figure. The times of comparing yourself to other people is something that you draw to a close as you become a developer. When you're a developer, there usually aren't any other developers exactly like you. And I know that's kind of a non-answer, but what you want to figure is that there are enough situations where somebody wants an in-house person to do that for them, that even if you end up as a developer working as the main consultant and just developing a WordPress site for somebody, is that the end of the world? I know a lot of people that get contract jobs where what they're up to is trying to help a set of people who have no idea how to use Wix or WordPress just get their site up. Now, of course, that's not everybody, but you also want to figure that there's a tremendous amount of, what would you call it? Like there's like an influx of principles applied usually on the back end of software engineering towards the front end. If you want an example of what I'm talking about, check out HTML5 and compare it to its previous iterations. Besides, and I know this is kind of like the dark side or whatever, but excuse me, every corporation in the entire world wants to figure out a way to show ads to people that they actually watch, and that's the front end. So it's definitely not going anywhere. To be sure, though, in terms of hesitation, your only hesitation should be this. You want to get as good as you possibly can at this stuff before you start Hack Reactor. the JavaScript well enough to pass the interview is one portion of it. The other portion of it is the actual software engineering. The cool part about that is that I actually tried to design a portion of the course that's like that. So if you come in here to the module TAA, or I think it's at the very beginning too, so either the first or the last module, you can click on this, come in here, and look at the bonus prep modules. Now the bonus prep modules are another set of material. We call them modules 4 through 7. Excuse me, and it's essentially like what you keep hearing me talk about the pre-course. That's what you need to complete before you start the immersive program. It's an analog to that. So you'll go over HTML, CSS, Git, GitHub, a little bit of JavaScript testing. What else in there? Recursion, and just a bunch of stuff like that. Ah, excellent answer. Cool. All right, so let's go back to the general. If you pass the TA, I'm going to assume you mean TAA, are there specific IDEs that we need to get familiar with, or is the majority of, VS Code? So Visual Studio, that's like the official Hack Reactor Galvanize one right now. You're probably not going to see me code on anything because I started on Sublime and then unwillingly switched to Atom, and I'm a bit of a curmudgeon, so I don't want to switch to Visual Studio Code yet. I probably will. There's a set of videos on the YouTube channel that is essentially me installing Linux on a Windows machine using a VirtualBox. The next set of plans involves my installing Visual Studio Code on that and messing around with it and see what's up. So Visual Studio Code, that's your guy. That more difficult problem is range extraction from Code Wars. Ah, yes. That person who coded that was privy to my public shame. And yeah, so we put that version on the course. Actually, by the way, I'm trying not to say people's names, but that might change at some point. But person who posted about range extraction, thank you very much for posting that. By the way, the solution that I sent you was actually incorrect. I figured that out when I was setting up the test for the, where was it? This one. I set up the test for this one. I realized that I didn't set up the while loop properly. So sorry about that, but it's correct now. VS Code is worth it. Oh, excellent. Is there any CSS material in the prep course? How much would you say is in the primary course? CSS selectors come up, and you'll have to have enough of an ability to debug CSS in certain instances. I am biased, though, because I don't like the front end either. I'm kind of like a math background guy, and so as far as I'm concerned, if it shows up on the website, it's fine. Somebody else who has an eye for colors or a talent for design can figure that out. However, there is some CSS. It's mostly like selectors, though, like figuring out how to... actually, why don't we just look at it? So for those of you who don't know what CSS is, it's cascading style sheets. And cascading style sheets is essentially a way to, what do you call it? It's essentially like, how should my elements on the page be arranged? And so CSS gives you a way to tell your browser, hey, I want you to load this into a box. I want the box to be colored this way. I need it to be organized relative to the other elements on the page in this fashion. And I changed this around so that I could show people something the other day, and I am worse at this than I want to admit. I'm going to give myself about 2 more seconds. Nope, never mind. At some point, we'll probably go into that more, but as you can imagine, there is not a ton of CSS material. It is mostly along the lines of just like memorization, or just look it up if you run into trouble. Although in that bonus prep modules, I wonder if I'm already logged in there. Bonus prep modules? I'm not. Okay, so what happens when I click this link? Filling out a form. I don't want to do all of that on stream. That's going to be kind of annoying. And I'm not exactly sure if I can... Well, the problem is that I haven't cleared out my email for this, and people subscribe on YouTube, and I don't want to put out their information publicly. In my view, it is better to err on the side of protecting people's privacy as well as my own. So we're not going to do that for right now. I would definitely encourage people who want to sign up for the bonus prep modules and just check out what's in there. It's mostly directing you to outside resources. Mostly like, hey, sorry. It's mostly directing you to like tutorials and books and things like that on subjects that come up in the pre-course material. But CSS is involved, and I think there's something called CSS Diner. It's a cool little interactive, very, very useful if you just, looking to kill some time. I saw there is something like only 20% passed the first time. What are some common pitfalls people fall into? A couple of common pitfalls. One, they don't take care of their body before the interview. You are going to A, want to get a good night's sleep. B, eat something before the interview. And then C, and this is huge, don't code up to the interview. A lot of people have this image, it's like, okay, my interview is at 7:30, it's 7 now, I'll sit down and code for a little while and get myself warmed up. Wrong. That is the equivalent of jogging to the start of your marathon. You've been practicing for months, or hopefully, weeks or months for the TAA. The night before and the day of are not times to cram. It doesn't work like that. You have in you about 2 hours of coding at any given interval before you start to get a little bit cracked. At about 6 hours, you usually lose the thread if you don't stop and drink some water or get some food. So keeping that in mind, and the fact that the interview is, or the assessment or whatever, is about as stressful an experience as you'll have if you've never done one of those before, don't code up to it. Yeah. You also want to figure some people jump right into coding. They don't write any pseudocode or organize a plan first. And then we run into that whole people love their code problem, where when what they really need to do is just delete their code and start over, but they think that'll look bad, or they don't want to, or they really think that what they're doing is correct. So that's usually the pitfalls people fall into. A lot of times, though, the pitfalls are associated with lack of competency as opposed to any kind of peripheral issues. So that's where that whole amateurs practice till they can't, or what was it? Amateurs practice until they get it right, professionals practice till they can't get it wrong. That's the approach you want to take for the TAA, and that's also the approach that you want to take for like the advanced practice problems, provided they don't say more difficult than the TAA. If they say that and you can't get it, it probably has nothing to do with how well you're going to do on the interview. If you really want to be hardcore and confuse yourself, use Vim or Emacs in console. Yes, that would be an excellent way to make sure that you did not enjoy the time you were having. Vim and Emacs, you know what? I'm not going to do that. We're going to say, what is Vim? Vim is a clone with a... okay. Oh, yeah, right, okay. So it's essentially like a command line interface with a text editor. It's a command line interface text editor, which rather than letting you use keys that make sense, you type keys that mean other things in any other sense other than Vim. And if you are good at Vim, you make coding look like wizardry, would be the way that I would describe it. There's more to it than that, but it's essentially like one of the things you get introduced to in the pre-course is the terminal, GitHub and things like that, and that's usually what you're using it for, but it's also for file navigation. But Vim is a text editor that's like embedded in that terminal. The only issue with terminal, and bringing it up here, is that if you're on a PC, you won't have a terminal. And the commands that you'll use to navigate around what you'll call the PowerShell are not exactly the same. So that's why I usually avoid Vim or the terminal or anything like that. But that's in the bonus prep modules, organizing things around the the command line and terminal. And who knows? If this takes off, I will absolutely, if there's demand for it, walk you guys through a terminal. How do you go between different directories and move files, rename them, save things, edit files directly. It's cool stuff. Are there any other questions or issues that anybody would like to discuss? If nobody says anything for a little while, I'll probably just start coding stuff. But I do want to make sure that if there are any questions or anybody has any issues that they were like, oh good, finally a person to talk to, which I guess that'd probably be kind of like an overstatement. Every time I go to any Galvanize website, I always get a delightful little chat message that chat pops up and it's like, hey, what's up? Can I help you? So, always feel free to take advantage of that. The guy who does that is called Ryan, I think. He's a very nice guy. This is terrific. I wish I could have been here from the beginning. Oh, that's a very nice comment. Is the timing appropriate? Because that was the other thing, is that we were absolutely just kind of like, shooting in the dark on like, well, we'll just make it 6:30, but that's mostly because that would work for me. If there's interest in this, we would probably eventually send out some kind of like a survey, or if people could say like, hey, if there was a stream from this time to this time, I'd really enjoy it, because I'm certainly not attached to this time. It's nice, but it's not, the end of the world. Oh boy, we got several people typing. For the self-taught pre-course, I think it says do the technical assessment by May 29th, but the premium prep course says it goes to June 5th or 7th. Do the students in the premium prep course also have to take the technical assessment by May 29th, or do they take it after they finish the premium prep course? Premium prep gives you a couple of extra layers of like, they might let you interview a little bit later than people who are just generally interviewing, or, and this is also the case, you might take your interview with 7 days to go in the premium prep course. Premium prep also features these modules 4 through 7, but they're actually embedded in the course itself. So you want to figure that they give a slight advantage to people who sign up for premium prep. I don't love that, but you know, sometimes you get argued down, and there's probably a reason for it. But what you want to figure is that all of the interview timing and everything associated with that is all like, we do not want you to go to day one after dropping, close to 20 grand or a promise of 20-ish grand later on for those income sharing agreements, and then be unable to participate because it's moving too fast for you, or you just didn't have enough time to get done what you need to get done. Also I figured that they do change the date that you're allowed to interview by as it gets closer to the date that the immersive program is going to start. And the reason for that is that sometimes we get people who are previously were developers and they just want to switch to JavaScript. And so there's actually a guy who is mostly in charge of the pre-course process for software engineering right now, who I think he did the pre-course in a day and a half. And I remember he had an argument with one of the enrollment officers. The enrollment officer was saying, you can't finish this in a day and a half. And the guy, I think he learned to code BASIC before he could read. He's one of those guys. And so he was just like, no, just give me the material and let me try. And so he was able to get it done in a day and a half, which is, if you've ever seen the pre-course material, it's not a day and a half worth of work. For everybody else, though, we want to make sure that you get done that pre-course material, absorb it well enough so that on day one, you don't get this like overwhelming sense of like, oh my God, everybody else is going faster than me, I'm in trouble. Because honestly, more than actually being in trouble, that's what tends to shoot people in the knee for the immersive program is, I think I'm not doing well, and so it kind of compounds because every difficulty that I have, because you will have them, it's a tough course, seems not just to be a momentary difficulty, but a like career and life-altering difficulty. So everything gets all hectic, and to be sure, we try to avoid that by lots of stop guards in place, like the readiness assessment, the difficulty of the TAA, the deadline to take the TAA, and then also, all the people who are staff and, counselors and all that kind of stuff. They're all there for that as well. Let's close out Vim here. I've been ignoring the questions for a moment. Timing is fine, I just wasn't aware of it in advance. Oh, okay, cool. So it's probably going to be every Wednesday for now. So you can kind of bookmark that, going forward. We'll probably try to adjust it if things, if the demand is there. But for now, it's going to be 6:30 Central Time on Wednesdays will be this. And you also want to figure, I want to do what you guys want to watch. So if you have a problem that you've been working on that you want me to do, or if you want something specific, definitely just be like, hey, can you do this? Because the answer is probably yes. Unless I would look terrible doing it, in which case, well, I'll probably still do it anyway, because it's always nice to see somebody who seems like they're good at this just butcher it, because it happens to all of us. You think you're doing one thing and you do something else by accident, and then you don't realize it, and it's a disaster. All right. Mind going over some fashion inventory questions if you have some time? I do not, and I will. Are modules 4 to 7 meant to be done after the technical assessment? Should we just try to finish module 3 before the assessment? You want to think that there's two courses. There's the bonus prep modules, and there's the basic prep course. Everything in the basic prep course is fair game for the interview and the assessment. Everything in the bonus prep modules is just like, hey, here's some stuff to keep yourself busy until the pre-course comes out, after you've passed the assessment. It features topics that are similar to what's in pre-course, but not exactly. And so it's also mostly like, hey, there's a bunch of free resources out there. Why not let us kind of curate them for you and like organize them into spaces and stuff? Actually, that's a good point. I'll probably do a stream where I show you guys what the bonus prep modules is. So by next week, I'll have signed up for it. This link will let anybody who wants to sign up for it. It's a free course, very easy to get into. It is not as well curated as the basic prep course, but again, it's just me like making the edits. So if you have a problem with any of the portions or if something's spelled wrong, link's bad, always feel free to let me know. Fashion inventory. All right, let's talk about fashion inventory. I'm going to do it on the advanced practice guide one just because the other ones don't actually have tests. And so that can be kind of unsatisfying if you get to the end of it and it's like, okay, did I get it right? Write your own test. It's like, ugh, okay, fine. Where did it go? Ah, there it is. Fashion inventory part A. Do you have a... who was that? A person who asked about the fashion inventory questions. Do you have a preference on which fashion inventory? Keeping in mind, I would rather do part A, but I don't have to. So if you want part D or part C or part B, definitely feel free to holler. I'm going to give that person the length of a sip of water and a deep breath. Got to breathe too. Part A, excellent. Okay, so you have a fashion catalog, an inventory of items from various high fashion designers. The person who wrote this problem like floored me with this, because everything else was very engineerish, and then this just came out of left field of like, I don't know who Bruno Cucinelli is. But anyway, each designer has a lineup of shoes. Each shoe has a name and a price. It looks like this. Current inventory is equal to... First thing you want to take a look at is the data structure. We clearly, well, maybe it's not clear. We somewhat clearly have an array that has two objects. Each of the objects has two properties. One property is just a string, or is just the name with a string as a value. The other property is the shoes property, which has an array as its value. Inside of that array, which is again inside of an object, which is inside of an array, is individual objects describing each shoe. The main difficulty in this problem is figuring out how to traverse this. If you can figure out that, the rest of it is pretty straightforward. Write a function that will take in this current inventory array as its argument. Your function should access all the shoes across each designer and return them out in a flat list. Designer name, shoe name, blah, blah, blah. Should look like this. Here's an example of a flat list in code. So let's go ahead and jump over to Replit real quick. I'm seeing some love for MDN in the chat. Second that. MDN is going to be your best friend at some point. Or your worst enemy. No. So we're going to hit run here, and what we're going to see is that these new line symbols, also, if you're not sure about what is a backslash versus a forward slash, it's whatever direction the top of the slash is pointing. This is pointing backwards. It is a backslash. So there you go. Backslash n is a special character in a string. It essentially means when you're putting this to the console, move to the next line when you see this backslash n. And that's why they're all special characters are usually starting with a backslash. It essentially means like, hey, the next character is going to be describing something other than a character in the string. Could be a tab, could be a weird, symbol. And it does a bunch of stuff like that. So anyway, so that's what we're doing. We're creating a flat list. Where did I go? All right. Observe that a flat list refers to a string, yada, yada, yada. Hint, the return value is a string. Okay, cool. So the first thing that I'm going to do is decide that I don't like this interface. So I'm going to go over here to Replit so I can see everything nice and spread out. I'm going to grab my current inventory. I'm going to call render inventory. Okay, now I also want to make sure that I call this. So we'll say variable output is equal to render inventory. We're going to call it on current inventory. Go on then. And then we're going to console.log. Boy, output. There's where the equal sign should go. Okay, so I can at this point call this function in here, and if I get something that looks like this, except it's the the names of the shoes, then we are closer to good shape than we were if we were just coding in the code box and it says error. Sometimes those errors aren't as useful as they think they are, so let's do it here first. All right. So if the return value is a string, we want to create a result string. We're essentially going to go through. Let's slide this over a little bit so we can, yeah, that's going to be nice and easy to look at. What we need is we need this plus this as a string, and then a new line symbol. Then this plus this, and then so on and so on. And then when we get to the next one, we want this name of the shoe, and we're eventually going to put that all into the same string and then return at the end. So we'll say return result string. And for those of you who missed the whole let controversy, we've decided to let there be let. I'm going to be using let instead of var almost interchangeably because, well, I want to. We'll say return result. Now the first thing that we're going to want to do is iterate over the array. Say iterate over the inventory array. There's two ways to do a problem. One is when you know exactly what you're going to do the whole time and you can architect it nicely. The other one is where you don't really know what you're going to do, and so you try to approach it in a pickaxe fashion, which is to say you don't really know where you're digging, but you know you do need to dig, so you just start getting to it and see if anything kind of shakes out. What I mean by that is that I'm going to write a for loop here. Inventory. And I'm going to console.log inventory at I. If I've got to iterate over the inventory, let's just see what's at each iteration. So we'll go ahead and run. And okay, so we look like we have an object that represents each designer. So I'm going to create an alias that says let designer equal inventory at I. And there's no real reason to do that besides I just think it looks cleaner, and it's going to be easier for us to think about a designer. Oh, sorry, we want to call this designer object. Now, in our docs, it actually says it's a bad idea to do this, but I disagree with that a little bit, especially for beginners. It never hurts to tell yourself what a variable should be, so I'm going to. If I'm talking about the designer object, then I know that the designer object has two properties, one at name, one at shoes. And if I want to look at all the shoes, then I need to iterate over the array at that property. So a couple things need to happen. I need to iterate over the shoes for the current designer object. It might also help if I say something like let shoes array equal designer object.shoes. What that's going to let us do is when we do our inner for loop, we're going to say variable let, that's probably why you don't, but let j equal 0. J is going to be less than. So there's two versions. One is we say inventory at I dot shoes dot length. Provided we spelled length correctly, we could also say shoes array dot length. That's why I'm a big fan of aliases. I am not alone in that appreciation. Like, I feel like I like that because somebody whose skill I appreciated told me that they like that, which is how you're gonna how you're gonna find reliance on a lot of different things is you'll see somebody whose intelligence you respect do it, and you'll think, well, I want to do that too. And you will. So now we might be a good idea to just look at all of the shoes. So we'll console.log shoes array add j. Let's go ahead and clear our console and hit run. Now what we want to see is we want to see all those objects looking good. So we've got all of our objects. And what I'm going to do here is I'm also going to direct our attention to this idea. We could say designer object.name shoes array. Now what we're going to do here is I just want to see if I have access to what all these strings are going to look like, because if I have the name of the the name of the designer, and I have access to all those objects inside of my iteration on line 30, then I'm pretty close to a correct answer. Square pegs, round holes. Okay. Okay, cool. So we looks like we're almost there, right? We needed to say Bruno Cucinelli, tasseled black low top lace up, and then 1,000. So let's console.log something that looks like that. We want shoes array at j dot name, and then another comma will say shoes array at j dot price. So let's just see what that looks like. All right, getting closer. So what I would say is that this is pretty darn close to what we want our eventual string to look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to our string. We'll say plus equals, and then we're going to add each one of these in turn. The name of the designer, plus a space and a comma, the shoes array, plus a space and a comma, and then plus the price. Turns out that when we do something like this where we're adding a bunch of strings together, we don't need to turn this price into a string. It's going to do that for us. You do not want to rely on that, but I have done this problem about 4 dozen times, so it does that. Then we'll say plus, and then I think I want a new line symbol at the end of every line. Since this console.log has served its purpose, I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And the fun part about having set up our problem the way that we did and organizing it step by step is that we're done. We have now solved, oh God, I hope, the problem to the point where if we hit run here, the answer is, we have it. So that's it. For now, of course, we need to go ahead and make sure that this actually works. So let's go ahead and copy this using Command-C, if you're curious. Bring it back over here, and then find out what we did wrong. Now, the reason I always say find out what we did wrong is that you always want to assume that your code is going to break, because eventually you will be the person that is paid money to fix things. So getting used to the idea of yourself as like a very overpaid maintenance man is an excellent way to make sure that people on your team love you and that you never lack for work, because everything breaks all the time, and a thorough understanding of your utility as the person who fixes things is a great way to find value in your life. Well, at least for certain people who are likely to be good at this on a long-term scale, because not everybody who can code will be a successful engineer, but the overlap is pretty reasonable. So let's go ahead and find out what we did wrong. Shoot, we didn't do anything wrong. Well, that's okay. You also want to make sure that you don't get disappointed if you didn't do anything wrong, because that's the idea, right? For the person who was asking about that question, do you feel as though your answer or your question has been addressed in a satisfactory fashion? Well, I'm going to assume the answer to that is yes, because that was a relatively satisfactory answer. If you didn't like it, though, you want to figure that there's another version of my doing this inside of Module 2, where we might do it differently. I don't remember what I did. And eventually, of course, because the videos are so low rent, the idea is that we're going to replace them relatively often, because, things will change. Ah, yes, most definitely. That is excellent news. And what timing, too. 7:29. I basically promised an hour, and we have delivered an hour in 10 minutes, so that's good news. I want to stick around for a couple moments, though. Is there any other questions on the... Yes, indeed, we are in good shape. So, if there... Also, always feel free to make fun of me about that. I'm convinced that that's one of those, you need to remain humble. That's the best way to avoid any negative feelings of programming. So always feel free to make fun of anything like that. The only caveat, of course, would be, try to be professional to the other people in the Slack group. I don't mind anybody messing with me, but in terms of trying to keep a professional atmosphere, that's always a good idea. We don't want anybody in here to feel, shunted from the group or excluded or anything like that. But if there's anything that I'm doing that makes you laugh, or that was, hey, this is spelled wrong, or you stuttered in this video, or this video is terrible, please redo it, that stuff's all good. Please feel free to send it in general or, direct message. So cool. So I'm going to give a countdown of, not audibly, but mental countdown of just kind of wrapping things up. If anybody has any other questions, definitely feel free to holler in the chat and say, hey, for the next stream, could you? Because the answer is probably yes. I'm going to do these regularly on Wednesdays at 6:30. And yeah, it's going to be user-directed mostly. I want to hear what kind of questions you guys want to go over. If nobody shows up, of course, I'll probably just get on Code Wars and just kind of hack at that for a little while. Also, you have official permission to use the word hack when you're talking about anything, because it feels cool until you realize that hack is kind of an insult for your code, but that's okay. Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you all for showing up, those of you who did. Those of you who couldn't, I guess you won't be able to hear this. But it's okay. We'll probably do another one of these. Well, no, we will do another one of these next week, and you could show up to that one. Send me any direct messages or questions. Have you used Anki for remembering JS concepts? I have not made use of any flashcard style thing for JavaScript concepts. It's mostly utility and practice. Like, you kind of get used to the things that you want by practicing them, but an Anki deck is an excellent way to remember almost anything. So if you were, approaching an interview and you wanted to do that, I would try to make sure that you do equal parts coding to things like Anki decks. If you're not sure what an Anki deck is, it's kind of like it's a flashcard app that, if you get one right, I think it kind of puts it away, and if you get it wrong, it shows it to you again, so you try to repractice it, which is a pretty cool thing. Formative and enjoyable. Oh, excellent. To be sure, if anybody had a problem with this, if you couldn't hear me, you couldn't see the text, you don't need to say it in the general, but you can, of course. But always feel free to direct message me. I don't have any problem ignoring people if they send a message that is no good, which is to say insulting or defamatory or any that kind of nonsense. But anything else, I usually have a pretty decent idea of who to direct you to, because I've been at Hack Reactor, well, since it wasn't called Hack Reactor. Been here for a while, so I usually know who you need to go to or talk to. I did the software engineering program, and I kind of run the DSI prep space right now. I have a couple of ballers that work underneath me, and so they kind of run themselves, but that's who I am. Oh yeah, and I wrote the large portions of the prep course that you're doing. So if anything comes up, definitely feel free to holler. I thoroughly enjoy chatting with almost anybody about code, so if you have something that comes up, bounce ideas off of, especially now when people are kind of indoors more than outdoors, it never hurts to have somebody just to be a sounding board for. A lot of the interactions I would have with mentored prep students would be them sending me 5 messages. One is, I don't get this. I tried this. It didn't work. I don't think I'm right for this. Ooh, wait, is this the answer? Hey, I got it. And, then I'd be like, oh, great job. And they'd say, oh, thank you so much, which was weird because I didn't do anything. But hopefully what we're going to try to do is translate that from a one-on-one thing to one to whoever wants to get it kind of deal. What's the difference between DS and the software immersive program? They might not like that I say this, but I don't really like consulting copy documents for marketing things, so I'll tell you what the truth is. Data science is a legitimate finishing school for people with advanced knowledge in mathematics and programming. It's very, very difficult to get a job after the data science program if you don't have some kind of background or have been at it for a long time. Software engineering is a little bit more, anybody can do this, provided you put in the work. But data science is like that too. The only problem with data science is that there really is no getting around the mathematical concepts that underlie, machine learning and things like that. So if you don't have any math background, you're going to have a pretty tough time with data science. But that said, we have a couple of absolutely incredible data science instructors over on that side, and they built out a prep program that's supposed to take you from zero to the interview. So while it is difficult, it is absolutely not impossible. And for the most part, you're going to benefit from thinking of yourself as an individual in these cases because, can everybody go from zero to data science immersive graduate? No. Could you? Isn't that kind of up to you? To be sure, though, it would be helpful if somebody was to say, you might want to start with software engineering if it's either one for you. If you have a background in mathematics, if you've done advanced statistics work, and by advanced I just mean, undergraduate level, then, maybe give it a try. If you've never done anything, you probably want to start with software engineering, just because software engineering does start a little bit lower, and there is a little bit more room for, I'm not really into math, but I'm really good at design, and it's like, well, you probably could have a place as a software engineer. If you don't like the math, data science is probably not going to be your favorite, just because whereas software engineering and computer science oftentimes comes down to finding what the correct answer is, data science a lot of times is trying to come up with the correct answer or find the best answer for a situation. So I wouldn't necessarily advise people to go towards data science if this is like a brand new thing for you. That said, I am a big fan of the idea of people who have been in software engineering for a little while heading towards data science, because you want to figure if you have background in mathematics or software engineering, data science becomes a very reasonable thing at that point. So if you're brand new, start with software engineering. If you have some background in software engineering and mathematics, maybe head for data science. What are some tips for keeping inspired when learning JS, since things can get dry? Try something completely different. Go to a website that teaches you how to do visualizations with HTML and CSS. That's another good one. Take breaks often. Pomodoro technique. I think BI. Data science is pretty cool, though. I'm a big fan of it. All right. Well, what are some tips for keeping inspired? You want to figure that there's always room to do something different when you're trying to learn JS. So you could read a textbook like Eloquent JavaScript. You could do a prep course like ours. You could do coding challenge websites like Code Wars and LeetCode and things like that. Or you could go and be like, what's an introductory project to get better at JavaScript? And see what happens. Here are 10 projects you can do to build your JavaScript. Sounds like a good place to start. Skill Crush. Excellent work. Build a JavaScript clock. Things like this. This is what I would do, is that remember that the entire internet may be filled with people who are angry and may make you feel bad at certain times, but it's also filled with tons of people that literally just want to, like, quote, okay, good, literally just want to, what is it, watch the world learn. So there's tons of resources out there like this that's like, hey, try this. We actually used to host the problems on CodePen. I remember that. Yeah, I would do things like this. Just get on the internet and look up what are some projects that I can do with this. And if you can't get at that point, maybe go back and study some more. Or say, hey, could you do this on the stream? Because provided I have at least a day to warm up, I can usually do stuff like that. For the past 3 days, I've been stuck on the last 5 questions. I got really frustrated. How long should it take someone to do all those questions? First of all, don't ever try to do all of the questions in one sitting. I feel like I should have made that much more obvious, but you really, really don't want to do... Here's what you want to figure happens. There's a rate of diminishing returns. Hour 1, you're usually around your best. Hour 2 is when you start to head a little bit off of the peak. Into hour 3 and 4 is when you become a different person. You are not as good at solving problems, and you are more likely to convince yourself that that is because you're just not good at this than, hey, I'm hungry and I've been at this for a while. If you find yourself stuck on things for more than 3 hours, stop. Just take a break, walk around, go outside if you can. Stretch your shoulders. You want to keep in mind that your body is a machine just as much as your computer, and if you overtax it, it's not going to be kind to you. Water is a big thing, but food is also important. Coffee and caffeine are one of those things that's kind of like a oh, I need my caffeine to program, but caffeine can make you anxious, so try not to overdo it with the caffeine. Food helps a lot, getting a good night's sleep and coming back to the problem the next day. But the biggest thing that you want to keep in mind is, they go over this, I don't love it, but it's mostly because I don't understand it that well, but growth mindset. You want to think of yourself as somebody who is going to be a professional developer at some point, and yeah, just think of it like that. If you're having problems, it's because, well, it took you a little bit of time to get used to that. But it is not the case that if you fail on something on day 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, that day 5 through 55 through 5005 might not be a completely different story. And you're never really going to spend, you're never going to regret time that you spend trying to learn difficult concepts like this. It tends to sort of like flex your brain muscles, as it were, make things like filing your taxes easier, because if you can debug a node runtime environment error, which sounds more difficult than it is, you don't worry about that. But if you can do that in a complex system, you can file your taxes, or you can apply for a loan. Things like that tend to get a little bit easier. Not that getting a loan is easy, but just like reading the paperwork, because what is paperwork except documentation? Makes the world seem a little different at that point. Oh, that's the other thing. Don't ever worry about going back to Module 0 and just starting over again. Starting over again is one of those things that can be very, very useful if you contextualize it properly. You want to think of it as, this is me going back to the gym to do those exercises again, or going back to the drawing board and redesigning my sketches from, sorry, all my metaphors are going to be gym and sports related. I'm sorry, I led a relatively basic life, but there's lots of versions of this, but it's like, go back to the basics and remind yourself how much better you've gotten, and then just keep iterating. Like, keep doing those problems over and over again, and hang in there. Send me a message if you want to walk through anything. Usually, especially with these streams now, it's definitely going to be an avenue for students that might not want to do premium prep to have a little bit more, certainly not one-on-one, but coaching, as it were. So I'm getting super tired, and it's about 10 minutes past the hour that we said we're going to end this, so I'm probably going to wrap things up. There are a couple people typing, so I do want to give them a chance to send their messages. Okay, so that's a... oh, it's my pleasure, y'all. Thank you all for showing up. If it does persist, I'm brand new to streaming on YouTube, so if it does persist, definitely feel free to watch it. It's not like I don't want it to be up there. It's more of just like, the utility of these are going to be in the live interaction as opposed to like watching it later, but that might change. I feel like all of this is going to be dependent on how well it affects students' ability to get better at coding. That's the end goal, is we want to see you all develop yourselves into a slightly more programming version of yourself. And if we can do something different, save in the live streams or not, then we're probably going to do it, just because, well, that's the whole point, right? That's kind of why I love working for Hack Reactor. They do seem to be more interested in getting students to be educated than they are in the just making money. And you can tell, because it's like, why would we give a difficult TAA and then give you a readiness assessment if we didn't want to make sure that you did not get into something that you couldn't handle? At least that's the way I think about it. So, that is going to be pretty much it. Thank you all so much for watching and for showing up and for asking questions. Send me a message on DM in general if you have any questions or issues that you want to discuss personally. But other than that, hope you stay in good shape or something. And I'll probably get better at the outros as things go. But take it easy, y'all.